Greetings, this is Jim Lindsay. This is a CIS lesson, and this lesson is over the design principle contrast, and that's presented in Chapter 5 of your design textbook. And let's get started. Contrast is when you have two different items, or two items, and you want to make them as different as possible. And so I have, to help you remember that, I have two people on your screen, and they contrast in a lot of different ways. One is a lady, one is a man, one's really short, one's really tall, and so that's what we're looking for as you place things on your pages of your as you desktop publish, or even as you make things for the screen. Try to implement stark contrasts as much as possible. When things are similar, that's when they start to look ugly and weird. And you'll see that when we get to especially when we get to the font faces later in the book, like back in chapters 9, 10, and 11, she does a really good job of pointing that out. You probably never thought about it before, but when you have those similar items that are they're just kind of similar, but they're not like super. That's when pages start to look kind of weird and ugly. And so instead of that, go for like really big differences. And so let's take a look at some different examples of that. All right, let's look at page 66 and 67 of your book. And what you see on the left is the same exact stuff that you see on the right. The text is exactly the same. But if you were a reader, I think there's no doubt that you would much rather be looking at the one that's on the right. And the reason for that is because of contrast. And this is a form of contrast that we're going to be able to employ, especially where it says another newsletter at the top of the page. Because we're working with a budget, this type of contrast is something that you and I can employ probably a lot, because it's essentially what the author did is they took those bits of work, those words, another newsletter, and they just put a fill color behind it. There's a rectangle back here. And then they made the font the same color as the page and made that really stand out against this white page. And down here at the bottom, they did the same thing. They made this black ruler. So there's, again, this sort of beginning and end to the page through these black rectangles here. You see this very bright text, this another newsletter, which stands out much better than it does over here on this side. We've already talked about the use of, when we were talking about repetition, we talked about the bolding of title. When you have titles for stories, that's a very effective way of starting to use repetition. Well, this contrast of the font size and the font color with the rest of the words on the page, as well as the background of the page, those are effective means of using contrast in this example. So this is the first one that you see as you get into this chapter. All right, let's look at contrast, a really good use of color to contrast text on a page. And this comes from, if you're looking in your book, flip back to page 71. And it's a postcard that you might get if you're part of an Apple Macintosh user group. And the contrasting colors, you have the purple Macintosh up on the top of the page, as well as the size of that text compared to the rest of the page. That's effective. Then you have these, the repetitive column headings here, or little section headings in the green text with a nice heavy boldness to them. That's an effective use of contrast. And so this is a nice example, I think, of contrasting colors to get a positive impression. Now it also is using proximity and alignment. Again, rarely do you see an example of in Robin Williams' work where there's just one principle being employed. She usually employs multiple principles in order to make an effective desktop published document. And so you're seeing lots of those here. You have like the alignment of these different little sections together, as well as we've got the effective use of white space here in the middle to create these gutters for us. We've got this nice line down here to create sort of the bottom edge of our page. So and you get the top one up here, and these guys align with one another. So good uses of alignment, contrast in this document. So I wanted to bring this to your attention. All right, the last two examples are both from flyers or posters. The first one is for an event like the Book Savvy event. This comes from pages 74 and 75 if you're looking in your book, and please look in your book because the examples she gives there are almost the page size of a page, whereas what you're seeing here is so small. But again, the content is exactly the same from left to right, but through this really nice use of contrast, putting like a black block on the page or a dark block on the page with really bright text, she takes this information right here and better shows it. I think she basically effectively gets rid of this one picture right here and uses this, these sort of darker, contrasting image pictures, colors that you get from this image right here, and puts those on the page. So this is, the second to last example I wanted to bring to your attention, and the last one is this one right here for the dog bakery. And you'll see that again, just like in the another newsletter example we looked at the beginning, the name of this thing is called Hugs, right? And so up here at the top, by making that nice dark top and bottom, and then a contrasting light font against a dark background, we get that really shines through. The enlargement of the picture right there, the proximity, use of proximity here. And so this is another, I think, good use of proximity and all these other principles that we've been learning about. So it's a pretty easy chapter. Contrast, kind of makes sense once you know what to look for. That whole Joshua Tree Epiphany that we've been talking about from the beginning. So we've been learning about contrast, and hopefully you will employ all of these principles together and start to experiment and make your documents that you create look pretty as well. Thanks for your time and attention.